LNG and gas have a critical role to play in the energy transition, not only in meeting, that increased energy demand, but also in helping to decarbonize and over time defossilize. We start with actually taking the gas from the ground, liquefying it, shipping it, regasifying it, and then selling it. Tariffs, trading routes, shipping routes that can't be used. It's a big thing that's on, our customers' minds, having that global diversified portfolio. So LNG, it's pretty cool, right?
Hello and welcome back to the Energy Podcast from Shell, the home of conversation about the energy that powers our world. I'm Bryony McKenzie.
And I'm Eddie Veal.
And this is our second episode together.
Yeah, season pros at this point.
Pros at this point. I mean, how did you find the first episode, or have you found it? What about your colleagues in trading? What do they think of you doing the podcast?
It's very different from my day job. I think it's been fun to see the reaction. I got an email that somebody had captioned the video and they sent it back and said, I guess it's Mr. Veal now. So that was...
Absolutely.
Yeah, getting my own office now, I think.
Wardrobe.
That would be great. A dream. But I think what was also really cool is within an hour or two of the video going out, or our first episode, some of our interns from last summer, Caitlin and Stephanie, sent me an email and they were like, hey, it's really cool to talk about the energy transition and see Texas being involved. So that was awesome.
And that was right, because our last guest, Peter Wood, we had a great conversation about the energy transition and where things stand and how that's going to change as global demand goes up as well. But today we're kind of going narrow and deep into something different.
That's right. Liquefied natural gas, or LNG, as we sometimes refer to it as, is playing a really crucial role in that energy transition. It provides energy security, but it's also something that can help displace coal in industry and also in power generation.
LNG also provides flexibility as renewable generation grows as well.
Yeah, it's certainly got a lot of upsides, but it's not without its critics, especially as it relates to emissions from producing, moving, and using LNG.
And I think today we're going to get into all of this, right? We're going to get into the outlook for LNG and, of course, the challenges that come with its use as well. But before we do that, a quick note to say when we say Shell or we're talking about Shell PLC and its subsidiaries in general. The companies in which Shell PLC directly and indirectly owns investments are separate legal entities. So let's get to it. So today we've brought in a heavyweight voice to help talk us through LNG.
As only we can, right?
As only we can. He's the head of a world-leading integrated gas business. He's also going to talk us through what LNG actually is. It's Shell's president of integrated gas, Cedric Cremers. Welcome to the podcast, Cedric Cremers. Great to have you here, Cedric. Let's start with a bit about you. How do you get to where you are today at Shell?
Thanks, Bryony. It's great to be here today. How did I get to where I am here at Shell? Long story, but I'll try to keep it short. I actually, by degree, I studied economics and business. I'm from the Netherlands. I actually spent a short time in London looking at whether or not I enjoyed things like investment banking, which I figured out I didn't. And I wanted to work for a company that really built things that made an impact, that served customers. Ended up going back to the Netherlands and ended up joining Shell. And I'm still here today. Yeah.
And President of Integrated Gas is actually a new role, isn't it? So how are you finding that?
It's still early days, just about 2 months in. So I think you have that early phase of drinking from the fire hose, and I actually have a feeling like I'm drinking a little bit of the water right now. So but it's great. It's a real privilege to be in this kind of role, to represent that massive amount of people that have passion for gas and that are running our business around the world in integrated gas.
Absolutely, and it's obviously a hugely important, and we're going to get into to the details of why that's the case, but specifically around LNG. But let's talk about natural gas briefly. Yep. So for listeners who might not know or might not follow it, give us a sense of the role that natural gas, firstly, is playing in the energy system.
Yeah, I think natural gas plays a huge part in helping us decarbonize and reduce emissions in our energy system. Both in terms of the role that it plays in terms of helping our customers shift away from higher emitting alternatives, whether that's coal or even biomass or liquid fuels that they use in certain areas. but also how it helps support renewables, actually. Maybe things that we can explore more during the podcast today. If we look at gas, we actually see in the next 15 years that we expect it to be the second fastest growing energy source. And that's second after what we would call non-hydro renewables. So all the renewables other than hydro energy. So that's wind, that's solar, etc. So those are absolutely number one in terms of expected growth, but we actually expect gas to be second after that.
Just tell us as well, just for people again who might not know, what do we use natural gas for?
We use it for lots of things. Traditionally, we use it in heavy industry, for example. It's used to produce electricity, so to generate power, but it's also used in a lot of places for example, residential heating or commercial heating of buildings, etc. So a lot of different uses that it has. Yeah.
Yeah, Cedric, it's really interesting to hear that commentary on the broader gas picture, focusing a little bit now on LNG or liquefied natural gas. Well, what that is tangibly, right, is we chill the natural gas that you've been talking about to a really cold temperature to induce a phase change to get a liquid, which is easier to store, it's easier to transport, and it gives us the ability to bring it to different parts of the world that may not be connected to a pipeline or a natural gas source. But it's still it being LNG is a relatively small percentage of that broader natural gas picture that you've been painting in the energy system. So can you maybe speak to why LNG is important?
Yeah. So LNG, just to be corny for a minute, Andy, here, it's pretty cool, right?
We're all right with corny. Corny's good.
Exactly. So cool. And it is something that, just so people know, it's cooled down to minus 160 degrees. And that's in order to, as you say,
that's Celsius,
to be able to
right?
Celsius. Actually, it doesn't matter too much when you get that cold, whether it's Celsius or Fahrenheit, but that's Celsius indeed. So that we can ship it around the world, because it is in a gaseous form normally, and we make it liquid by doing that. So that's liquefied natural gas. If you look at gas, back to it, it's, and you look at a large country, it would typically source its gas from three places. It either produces it itself in the country, so that's what we would call domestic production, or it imports it through pipelines from one country to another. Of course, that's something that we've seen in the past happen a lot across the European continent, for example. And the third one is that it would import LNG. So it comes in by vessel, and then through what we call a regas terminal, it's regasified and turned into gas again before customers use it.
Are there any specific regions that do that more than others?
Yeah, so I think if you look at it in terms of the key growth and the demand traditionally, maybe let's start there, in the past has been countries such as Japan, Korea, Taiwan. Now, those were the traditional consumers of LNG because they didn't have any of their own natural gas. Nowadays, Europe is also a big importer of LNG, and across the Asian continent, actually, China is a big importer. India is growing. Southeast Asian countries, etc. Now, as you said, LNG is actually not the largest out of those three, but it is the fastest growing. So out of that gas growth that we see, we actually expect about 2/3 to be from LNG. There's a very simple reason why. Where the most of the gas is in the world, in terms of where it comes out of the ground and where it's stored underneath the ground, is not actually where it's consumed. And so the big areas where there is gas are places like the Middle East and North America, and the demand is in places like Asia. So it's around, and that would be a pretty long pipeline to send one from North America all the way over to Asia. So it's much more efficient and ultimately economic for our customers to liquefy it and then ship it across those long distances.
And give us an idea of that LNG and the difference that it makes to people's everyday lives.
Yeah, so I think, first of all, in many places, actually having access to reliable energy is where it starts. Fueling lives, fueling economies, being able to have lights in the evening, being able to heat their homes, these kind of things, etc. But also, very importantly, because when we globally think about this, Bryony, it's emissions, it's climate change that we often, and carbon that we think about. But in many of the places where our customers consume LNG, actually local air quality is also a huge impact in terms of making sure that people actually have healthy air to breathe, and that they can go out without large haze in the cities, etc. We've seen a number of Asian countries that LNG and gas have really played a role in shifting away, for example, from coal, not just for generating power, but also for large industry close to these cities. And it's therefore ultimately improving and contributing to improving people's lives around the world.
So let's talk about market outlook and confidence in LNG. And in our own outlook, we've projected 60% global growth in demand by 2040. Shell shareholders have asked Shell to provide more insight into our assumptions and that future demand. What makes you so confident in Shell's outlook?
So actually, indeed, I think it's really great that our shareholders are taking that deep interest in LNG, and they see the plans that we have to grow in LNG. And I think rightfully, as a shareholder, they say, hey, help us understand why that would be the right thing to do. So I welcome that querying and that debate, and I think it's healthy. I think ultimately, if we look at the drivers of these economies and the growth, it starts with population growth in still large parts of Asia. And then from there, it goes into people moving up the income curve. And there, the amount of energy that somebody consumes as you go along that curve grows actually quite rapidly. So that's fundamentally what's underneath the energy demand growth in Asia and in many places still there. Now, first and foremost, again, back to where we started, wherever we can is trying to meet that with renewables. And in areas where energy is consumed as electricity, whether that's the lights that we have on, or whether that's for more and more cars, what we would call light mobility, using electric vehicles would be the right way to go. I think it's not always well understood when we think about energy. We very often, as just a normal human being, we would think about electricity. But did you know that only 20% of worldwide energy is actually consumed as electricity today, if we look at it worldwide? And that percentage only grows by a few percent every decade, if we look back. Now, that has to grow massively if we want to achieve our ambitions of energy transition and electrification. But there are so many parts of the economy that will just not be able to do that. Large industrial processes, they need high energy density, which they simply can't get from electricity. Or heavy transport, large ships, for example, they just can't do that with electricity, and they need the cleanest possible source of energy, but they also need it as a molecule. And we see that our customers are more and more turning to gas to help them do that.
So if we look at the flip side of that coin, so talking about demand, if we look at global supply, so currently it's dominated by a handful of countries, I think US, Qatar, Australia, and perhaps some others. Is that diverse enough in terms of supply to provide the world with that security of supply that you've been talking about?
Yeah. So this is a hugely important question, and it's a challenge that we hear back from our customers often, is when they are looking to buy LNG from us, they want to be sure that they're getting it when they need it and when we've promised it to them. Because ultimately, they ensure that their factories can run, that their homes can stay warm in the winter, and that the lights stay on for all of their customers. So they rely on that LNG being there when they need it. One of the big things they do look at us for to say is how can you make sure that you have a global portfolio, a company like Shell, to be able to provide that reliably. And as you say, Bryony, let's just think about the geopolitical tensions we have in the world. Tariffs, other things, trading routes, shipping routes that can't be used. So it's a big thing that's on our customers' minds around having that global diversified portfolio. We work hard to keep that as diverse as possible. We have plants, as you say, where we source our LNG in the Middle East, in Asia, in Australia, in Africa, even in places like Trinidad and Tobago and Peru. But it is also about balancing that against one of the other needs of our customers, which is that it's affordable. And so the balance between those two is what we try to strike in our portfolio. And one of the realities is that often places like North America and the Middle East are the most competitive sources in terms of producing LNG and bringing it to the customer.
Yeah.
Cedric, I really appreciate the picture that you painted on the compelling future that LNG has. And you mentioned a little bit there around some of the geopolitical implications of what's going on in the world.
Yeah.
I think that we would be remiss if we didn't talk about one of those factors that's going on right now, and that's Russia's large-scale invasion of Ukraine and the disruption that it's had to the global LNG supply chain. So I guess my question there to you is, how has that conflict itself influenced that global LNG picture?
Yeah. So just, I think it's a great question, Eddie. Just linking back to what I just mentioned, right? How customers don't want to be dependent on just one supply source, right? Even when it comes to LNG. And I think one of the things that the war, and then the energy crisis that followed showed us is that Europe was actually too dependent on one source of gas, namely Russia, as a continent. And that drove prices up massively in that time period of 22 and 23. Now, a lot of that has been backfilled by LNG right now, coming from places like the US, but also other things. And Europe is kind of reinventing its gas portfolio right now to make sure that it is reliable. I was actually this morning with one of our large gas customers, and in Germany, and their CEO was talking about making sure that they had product coming from the north, the south, and the west, and less so from the east. But really, they're looking at multiple sources, and a lot of it's not just LNG, by the way. They're also looking at pipeline gas from North Africa, for example, or Norway. But increasingly, we see that LNG is the one that steps in to fill the final gap in terms of demand and available supply in a place like Europe. Yeah.
So as the world looks to those alternative sources, there's been some that have said we're actually going to get to a point where we have excess of LNG. Do you have any comments there?
We've actually come out of a period of very low new supply, if you look at the last few years. Now, why is that? You have to think of an LNG plant takes about 5 years to build from when you start until it starts producing LNG. Now, let's go back 5 years. Where were we in 2020? COVID.
Inside our house, probably.
We're very low. There wasn't a lot of investment in our industry. There was a lot of distraction, other things that were more important at the time in COVID. And so there weren't a lot of new projects being started in that time period. And that's why we see low supply now. And then, Eddie, what you just mentioned, what happened in 2022 and 2023 when prices went up? A lot of LNG sellers suddenly were bringing a lot of cash in. So what did they do with that money? They started reinvesting it to meet that future demand. But because it all tends to happen at the same time, what we do see is that there's now, in the next few years, a lot of new plants coming on, particularly in places like the US. It may mean that we have a period where we have a little bit more supply than where demand will take a few years to catch up to that. But I think that is something that is part of the nature of our business. Shell, we're very much a long-term investor. We don't look just at what's going to happen in the next 2 to 3 years, but pretty much what happens over the next decade, the next 15 years. And those are the long-term trends that we look at, and that give us the confidence to continue to invest in LNG.
So we've talked about market and we've talked about confidence. So on top of that bigger picture, let's layer on what Shell does and its impact that has on producing and transporting and delivering LNG around the world.
Yeah, so we've been a pioneer in LNG for decades now. And we're about 1/5 of the global market in terms of LNG that is supplied to customers. We've done that through investing in plants around the world in terms of where we produce the LNG, but also in regas terminals, whether that's in places like our Dragon terminal in Wales or in Hazira in India. So that's also throughout the value chain. You referred to my title at the start. That's why we call it integrated gas, because we're present in that full chain, right? We start with actually taking the gas from the ground, liquefying it, shipping it, regasifying it, and then selling it to customers, integrated across the value chain.
So, Cedric, it's exciting times for LNG Canada.
Absolutely, yeah.
Could you speak to where those cargoes are going and how they fit into the broader energy picture?
It is indeed super exciting time to see a project like LNG Canada start up. I've been there quite a lot recently supporting that project. Maybe one fact, it's actually, if you look at the pipeline plus the plant, it's the largest foreign investment in Canada ever. So it's not only bringing a lot of benefit to British Columbians in a place like the west coast of Canada, but exactly as you said, in terms of if you think of it from North America where the gas is, it's actually the shortest shipping route to all of those customers in Asia across the continent who are looking for more gas to help their livelihoods and to help them decarbonize. So we're pretty excited about that starting up.
Yeah, I mean, what a picture. Growth, expansion. But fundamentally, we're still talking about a fossil fuel.
Yeah.
To those questioning why we need more LNG to advance the energy transition, what do you say?
Eddie, I think there's a number of studies. The IEA, the International Energy Agency, very well renowned, for example, repeatedly has looked at this and says that if you use natural gas, including LNG, to generate electricity, that it's about half the emissions that when you use coal. And of course, it's a little bit different depending on exactly what that percentage is based on what you use it for. But it's pretty similar when you use it for different industrial sources, et cetera. So that it's really a major difference that it can make in terms of transitioning to gas today, in terms of the impact that it makes to help our customers decarbonize. There's one additional point that I would make, though, in terms of the role that gas plays to decarbonize, which is actually in many places that have seen a remarkably fast play out of renewable energy, and faster actually than even I would have believed, maybe going 5 to 10 years back, is that actually they've also been continuing to use or sometimes even increasing their uses of gas as a way that complements renewable energy. Why? The simple reason is that renewable energy tends to be intermittent. The wind doesn't always blow at the same pace. The sun doesn't always shine across 24 hours, of course, at the same degree. And so to be able to manage the peaks and the troughs of that energy generation, to have a stable energy supply, a stable grid, as we call it, often gas provides, that stability that actually allows more renewables to come into our energy mix as well.
Yeah, I think that for me, being a part of our trading business, one of the things that's been really interesting for us is we talk about those flexible assets like a CCGT or a combined cycle gas turbine. And when you look at those CCGTs, the flexibility that it provides these energy grids to be able to ramp up or ramp down when those renewables the sun shines a little bit less or the wind blows not quite as hard.
But to Shell's strategy, if we have a strategy that's largely built on gas, is that really compatible, do you think, with our overall climate targets and our ambition?
I think for me, there's 3 elements to that. Number one is the role that LNG plays today in helping our customers decarbonize. We've talked about that a little bit already, switching away from sources like coal, supporting renewables, et cetera. So that's a real world impact already being made today in terms of helping to lower emissions. I think secondly, what's important and is core part of our strategy is that we make sure that the LNG that we produce into the future will have a lower footprint, a lower carbon emission than it does today. We do that in a number of places. For example, when we build new LNG plants by making sure that they have a lower carbon footprint. How do we do that? Sometimes by utilizing carbon capture and storage. So rather than emitting the carbon into the air, is to actually capturing it, storing it under the ground. We're doing that together with our partners for the new plants that we're building in Qatar, for example. In other places, we will use as much as we can renewable energy to actually power the LNG plant. So, a lot of energy is also consumed in cooling the gas. So in the Emirates, for example, where a project called Ruwais LNG is where we will use renewable power to power the plant. One of the really important things is referred to as methane emissions, making sure that all of that actually stays in the process. So it stays either in the plant, in the pipe, and gets liquefied. Reducing that to really near zero is also a really important part in reducing the emissions of the LNG production.
I think the methane was a really interesting point that we were actually discussing.
Yeah, earlier. Absolutely. I was going to say, we were talking about it right before we actually sat down to film this. But speaking about those methane emissions specifically, what are we doing to reduce the emissions that come from methane as we produce, process, and transport the broader gas that we process as Shell?
Yeah. So there's lots of things, Eddie, that we do in terms of changing the equipment that we use that have basically ensure that we don't have any what's called slippage of methane. Making sure that we have newer, on vessels, for example, that we have the most modern engines. Sometimes it's also how we change the way that we execute processes on our plants, et cetera. But probably the most important thing that I've personally been working on for the last few years is making sure that they across the entire industry we're equally focused on this issue. And also very importantly in the upstream production of gas, making sure that there is no routine flaring, for example, and really bringing that down to zero and making sure that when there's oil production is that all the gas is actually captured and used to either consume through a pipeline or brought to an LNG plant to be liquefied. I think that's a really important way how, as a total industry, we end up reducing methane emissions to near zero.
Briefly, before we started talking about methane as well, that you were talking about decarbonising and that pathway of decarbonising LNG. And give us an example or give us an idea of what that looks like. Yeah,
so Bryony, three things. The role it plays today, maybe back to what I mentioned earlier, how we ensure that LNG is lower carbon into the future. And then the third one is how do we provide a pathway towards even defossilization? So back to what you said, Eddie, it is still a fossil fuel. One of the ways is that actually at the end of the day, gas is primarily produced from fossil fuel today, but it can be produced from other sources into the future, from biosources, for example, a biogas, or even further into the future, perhaps from synthetic sources. It's something we can already technically do today, but it's still quite expensive. But why is this important is it actually allows our customers to use those defossilized sources of gas without changing any of their infrastructure. So you can use the same engine on one of these vessels that we talked about, that would be using LNG. And actually, if they in future use bio-LNG, as we call it, so coming from a biosource, they can continue to reduce over time their carbon footprint and continue to, one of the ways how we continue to help our customers decarbonize. Yep.
It's interesting you mentioning pricing for some of those biofuels. Yep. When you look at LNG compared to your traditional natural gas, LNG itself can be considered expensive. And I guess there's a risk there that because it is more expensive, people are inclined to move back towards a traditional source like coal. Is that a big issue that LNG is facing?
I think, Eddie, if you look at our customers, affordability is certainly one of the things that they look at. But they also look at the reliability, the flexibility, and the confidence that an energy source provides. And I think it's that combination of things that our customers look at. And of course, very importantly, also then their carbon footprint of it, what they're using. What we've seen is that customers are price sensitive. We do see that if prices increase a lot, that maybe for some customers it becomes unaffordable because they also have to meet their commitments, of course, in terms of what their product costs for their, whichever customer is next in the chain. But when prices drop, we do normally see a sharp demand response. So we see more people buying LNG when prices drop in places like India, when we mentioned. And we see that much earlier than what I would call the equivalent price of coal. So while price matters, what maybe is one of the misconceptions is that people will only buy LNG when it's the same price as coal. That's not what we actually see from our customers.
Some people in the industry still refer to LNG as a bridging fuel. And I know that you were at World Gas Conference in Beijing quite recently. And I got the sense that now this is we've moved on from using that term. And I just wondered, what you thought about that.
Yeah, I don't like the analogy of a bridge because an analogy of a bridge means you're in one place, there's a big divide in the middle, and you move to the other side, right? And I don't think that that's the way that in reality the energy transition works. It's a much more gradual process. And if we've looked at energy transitions in the past as well, even going back over a century, it's often that the new energy that we're transitioning to, it gets added to the mix. But actually, the existing sources are also still very much needed in continuing to play a role in terms of providing affordable, reliable energy to the world and meeting that energy demand. So I don't expect it to be a bridge where it stops, but that LNG continues to play a role for a longer period of time. And again, I think at the end of the day, it's gas that we're talking about, which will also come from sources other than fossil fuels. That fact that parts of our economy that need a high energy density source, which is often a molecule. So what do I mean by a molecule? Power is an electron. Something like a gas or a liquid is a molecule, which has a higher energy density, which some hard to electrify sectors of our economy need. And I think it will continue to need something like that. But even in the future, if it's coming from bio or synthetic, and so really being low carbon, it's still that same gas type of solution. So I believe that a company like ours will still have the competitive advantages to continue to provide an energy source like that to our customers for decades to come, really. And so not just a bridge from one place to another, but something that will continue. Yeah.
And that point of addition was something that Peter Wood actually mentioned in our first episode, talking about the energy transition as well. And I've heard it in some other places as well. Interesting.
Yeah.
Cedric, we've covered quite a lot of ground today. I think we've talked about Shell's role, price volatility, market outlook, and confidence. And thank you so much for coming in. So this has been a really interesting conversation, Eddie. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, definitely, Bryony. I've learned so much as we've sat here today. And then I guess for you, Cedric, as we bring it all together, for those people that are wondering if LNG more broadly is holding back the energy transition or something that enables it going forward, a final word?
Yeah, thanks as well. I've really enjoyed the conversation, and hopefully the listeners have enjoyed it as well. Eddie, I think absolutely LNG and gas have a critical role to play in the energy transition, not only in meeting that increased energy demand that's about people's livelihoods and in improving their lives, but also in helping to decarbonize and over time defossilize. I'm actually convinced personally that for our company in the next 10 years, this will be the biggest impact that we can make on the energy transition, is being able to supply more LNG to those customers that need it. It's a critical part of us being the world leading integrated energy company.
Thanks so much for joining us today, Cedric.
Thanks as well.
Good to have you.
Thanks.
Thanks again to Cedric for joining us today. And Eddie, there was so much to take away from that conversation, wasn't there?
Absolutely. I think for me, it was, if you look back to the first episode, we talked so much with Peter Wood about the global energy system. It was really cool to see how LNG fits into that and the crucial role that it's playing in the energy transition.
And today we talked about the bigger picture, but next we're going to be bringing that to life really on the ground. So in our upcoming bonus episode, which I had the pleasure of doing, we'll be heading to LNG Canada, which is a major new gas project. And we're going to be going behind the scenes of what growing LNG, in fact, looks like in action. And if you're into big engineering projects and innovation, this is definitely the episode for you. I'm not going to have any spoilers, but it does involve a ski lift and no skiers. It's really, really interesting.
A ski lift, we don't get to play with those very often in the engineering world, so that's going to be really cool. And to see that, you're going to want to make sure that you follow and subscribe wherever you get your podcast, or you can watch us on YouTube.
And if you're enjoying the series, of course, you can leave us a rating and you can also share it. And just a reminder, you'll find Shell's cautionary note and references from today's show below in the show notes. Thanks so much for watching.
Thanks for listening.
Bye.